Hi folks, I'm Ed Amoroso and I'm here with my friend George Avetisov, who is the co-founder and CEO of a very cool cyber tech company here in New York City called HYPR. George, welcome.
How you doing?
Easy to get over here, right? Just came down from, you're in the 20s or so?
Yeah, I'm on 34th. You know, the walk from the train station was longer than the ride down here.
It's good to see, and I'm glad you set up shop here in New York City.
I'm glad we did too. You know, a lot of people expected us to be out in Boston or on the West Coast. There's not too many big cyber teams here in New York City, but I think that's changing, so I'm glad we stayed out here.
That's great, you're doing well. So tell me, how'd you get into cybersecurity and tech and so on? What's your personal story?
Well, it's interesting because the origin story is not the typical cyber origin story. I got into e-commerce at a fairly young age. So I was one of those kids that, you know, everybody else was cutting class. I was shipping eBay boxes, you know. And, you know, when you grow up in e-commerce, you tend to, you get into understanding how much fraud there is out there. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
There's unfortunately a ton of fraud on the internet, and on the merchant side, you feel it really hard. And before HYPR, you know, I was running an e-commerce business, and I was on the receiving end of a pretty fair amount of fraudulent transactions day to day. So that got me thinking about, you know, identity and why all these third-party tools that I was using weren't really working. Credential reuse was a big one at the time. Stolen credit cards, stolen passwords, loyalty cards.
So it looks like legitimate traffic coming in,
Everything
right?
looks, you know, you get them ranging from, yeah, that's an obvious fake. You know, it's like spotting a fake ID. It's that's on cardboard. Yeah, it's not going to work, you know, or a really nice laminated, you know, DMV issued ID, you know. So fraud online, you have to, you know, kind of have that human element. Automated tools can't do everything. At least back in the day, they couldn't. So from e-commerce.
And you were selling pretty expensive stuff, right? You weren't selling like little dumb things.
No, we were selling luxury goods.
Luxury stuff.
Yeah, so. And they were high ticket. Big ticket transactions. You wake up in the morning and you don't know if you're going to have a $5,000, $10,000 sale or a $10,000, $20,000 chargeback, and it drives you nuts. So at some point when I met the co-founders of HYPR, the idea there was, can we try something new when it comes to authentication? Can we solve for credential reuse and payments and digital identity and digital authentication? Could we solve for that in a new way, and how would we do that? And that's what led us to thinking about, well, I got one in my pocket.
Do we have a demo here? There we go, he's got his phone.
We've got an iPhone, right? About 4 years ago, we had the, 4 or 5 years ago, we had the 5S with the fingerprint sensor.
That was a big deal when that came, right?
It was a big deal. It got a lot of people thinking.
Yeah.
We were some of those people that started thinking, can we use these new devices to authenticate ourselves online?
Right.
And that's really how the genesis of HYPR was formed.
Yeah, just the ergonomics of pick up your device and you're basically authenticating as you grab it. It's quite an amazing
There's lots
thing.
of ways to do it. What we found was that with these devices, for the first time, we could enable decentralized authentication at a scale never before possible. And what we mean by that is we could use these devices to authenticate people in a way that's not susceptible to credential reuse or stolen passwords. And this was not possible 10 years ago. People weren't walking around with devices capable of that type of authentication.
Let me back up to that word, because if you're a computer scientist, you think decentralized, you kind of get it. But if somebody watches, does that mean, like, instead of all the credentials in a big bin somewhere, they're scattered across endpoints? Is that what you mean by decentralized?
So for years we've been using shared secrets or passwords, or you know, when you authenticate online, you enter a password. Or
Alice to Bob.
Alice to Bob, typical.
Share secrets.
And for the people out there who aren't familiar with the Alice to Bob, you're using the password, and that password gets stored somewhere, right? Now, millions of people's passwords are stored in one place. They're centralized. And when that centralized repository gets breached, millions of people get impacted.
OPM, Target,
LinkedIn, Yahoo,
LinkedIn,
Equifax, the list goes on and on. Now, what's really upsetting about centralized passwords is even if you're not breached, you're susceptible to credential reuse from other breaches. There's collateral damage that you can't control for. And some estimates have credential reuse at a 2% success rate, which means that, Target gets breached or OPM or Orbitz gets breached. You've got perfect OPSEC, nothing happened to you, and yet those credentials are getting reused against you.
Yeah.
That's bad.
Yeah, that's a pretty massive problem. So decentralized reduces the risk of a direct break-in to that shared repository?
The idea is to remove that target entirely. That centralized repository is a target. And we've been investing billions of dollars in securing it and improving it.
Yeah.
Well, today we can finally remove it altogether.
Yeah.
When we decentralize credentials, we store keys on personal devices. So we get rid of those centralized passwords and we start using our personal devices as a decentralized key to authenticate ourselves online. Now the idea there is PKI-based authentication. We've had this architecture for years. We've just never been able to deploy it at scale like this before.
Yeah.
So what's really interesting is just how many companies now are warming up to this concept and saying, hey, we want to get rid of credential reuse. We want to stop these mass breaches. And even if we haven't been breached, we don't want to be susceptible to the collateral damage of other breaches. Yeah. That's what decentralized authentication is all about.
That's fantastic. George, we've been talking about credentials and passwords. Are they synonymous? Like, is that, when we say credential today, does that kind of mean password and user ID password?
That's the one you hear about the most, right? Yahoo is 1 billion passwords, LinkedIn's 100 million passwords, and credentials can be credit card numbers, it can be your ATM PIN, it can be your password, it can be a biometric. It's anything you use to authenticate yourself online. So when we say decentralized credentials, we mean them holistically. We have customers who deploy decentralized authentication for credit card numbers. We have others who deploy it for biometrics. But passwords are the number one credential that you use day to day. So it's easier to say, let's get rid of centralized passwords. Everybody knows what that means.
So now the phrase passwordless, which I know is important to you guys.
That's a good one, yeah.
Take us through what that means. What's the essence of a passwordless experience for a user?
So remember when, let's go back to 2014 when Touch ID was really taking off and Apple Pay was announced. A lot of companies realized that they could enhance user experience by going passwordless, by using biometrics or behavioral authentication, or using the device as a factor to authenticate. And people love passwordless experiences. When you log into your mobile app on your phone, you're doing a password with Touch ID or Face ID, you're using a passwordless experience. These are great improvements for the convenience and the user experience of using the applications that we use. But in many cases, they don't actually get rid of the password. So a lot of companies have realized, hey, a passwordless experience is different from true passwordless security. And that's where we believe that decentralization really is critical, because that's where true passwordless security can take shape. That's how it happens. So companies come to us and they say, HYPR, we've got this great passwordless experience, but we're still storing passwords. We've still got the centralized repository of passwords. How do we get rid of it? That's where they start buying into the true passwordless story.
That's interesting. Now tell us about the product. Like, are you guys an app? Are you a toolkit? Are you a website? Are you a service? When somebody buys your product, when you ink a contract with them, what do they get? Like, what's the typical use case?
HYPR is a decentralized authentication suite. So we have SDKs, applications for mobile, web, desktop, laptop platforms that companies integrate into their apps.
So developers would be where the tire hits the road between your product and say a bank using what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Some people connecting it.
So some of our biggest customers are in the financial services sector, and their teams, whether it's a line of business or an IT team using HYPR for employee access, they integrate our SDKs into their applications, and it's actually very easy to deploy decentralized authentication. There's companies out there who say, yeah, it's going to take us years to go passwordless. It doesn't have to take you years to go passwordless. You can do it in weeks and months if you have the right toolkit. And that's what we hope to provide with HYPR.
Do they usually want to go passwordless because somebody on the security team is demanding it, or is it an executive who wants to save money, like from resets, or is it what are the reasons when people call you? Is it I'd like to think it's security people, but I'm no dummy. I'm sure there's a lot of other reasons why people are interested.
So it's interesting because we see lots of different stories, but a couple stand out to me as very common. Two dots make a line, so you start seeing these patterns. Oftentimes you get the line of business who deals with a lot of fraud, deals with a lot of password resets and headaches, and the line of business is saying, guys, we've deployed Touch ID or behavioral authentication, and we've still got the same credential reuse problems. We still get the same fraud rates. What's going on? And that's where
they seem to be going up instead of down, right?
They're either flat or they're going up, but they have not improved. And that's where InfoSec gets involved, and they say, well, listen, you're still using passwords. We have to, if you want us to address this problem, we need to get rid of your password store. And that's where I think the relationship, the gap has been bridged between lines of business and InfoSec teams, which are sometimes adversarial. There's kind of that friction between the line of business and IT and InfoSec who want them to do things a certain way. We're seeing that fade away here because this isn't a topic that they can all agree on. So we're seeing this initiated sometimes by executives who want to get rid of fraud, who want to reduce the cost of password resets, but oftentimes we are getting pulled in from the CISO side. Who have initiatives around getting rid of passwords across the organization. Sometimes it's on the employee side. We've seen customers who say, we're going to start with employee access, and then we're going to work our way out to the line of business. And we see customers who say, we're going to start with the wealth management side, and then we're going to try to get it adopted across other lines of business. So
I always use cloud as like the example of IT and security marching in the same direction, but this is another one. Like, it's one of those rare times when the tailwind for IT and security and fraud, like everybody kind of moving in the same direction. Should take advantage of it while it's happening, because the winds can shift.
You definitely should, and I think a couple of years ago that wasn't the case. I love the background ambience.
Yeah, that's somebody coming to catch the fraudulent folks using your passwords in your company.
They're going after the bad guys.
They're going after the password bad guys.
So this is one of those interesting times where the line of business and IT and InfoSec all agree on something. There's very rarely someone that you'll go to at a bank and say, do you want to get rid of passwords? And they'll say, no, I think we're fine.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that. But what I do hear is it's pain in the neck to do. So you guys spend a lot of time on kind of that SDK integration, because I've done a lot of that, and it can go poorly if it's either a bad SDK or a team doesn't know what they're doing or whatever. That seems to me to be one of the barriers, like just this fear that, oh my gosh, I'm taking on this big project that could fail. Do you put the teams at ease and try and help them get through those projects?
I think there's a lot of great companies in this space. And I think, in one of our recent talks with an analyst, they said there's something like 200 companies in the authentication space right now.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, it's massive. It's heavily saturated. And what they said was, HYPR, the two things that stand out to us when we talk to your customers is the decentralized authentication. It's extremely unique and differentiated, and it really resonates with the customer. And the ease of deployment. The ease of deployment, I think, is key, because it doesn't matter how good the product is. If it takes years to deploy, there's executives out there who aren't going to want to put their job on the line to do that. There's entire teams out there who will just shoot it down. And while, like I said, there's a lot of great companies in this space, some of them tell customers openly that, hey, this is going to take 18 months to 3 years. This is a journey you have to go on. That may be okay for some businesses, but a lot of teams out there don't want a revolution. They like buying boxes. They want to buy it, ship it, deploy it. They want to, they're very conservative about how they approach these things. And we're talking about eliminating passwords. This is critical path stuff. It's got to work, right? So I think that when you tell customers this is going to take 18 months, a year, or even 3 years, it's very intimidating.
Scary,
It's intimidating. So what we've tried to, pride ourselves on is getting a product to a place where it takes weeks to deploy. And I'm glad to hear that customers are liking that.
You guys get invited to things like FSI SAC, a lot of financial oriented things. It seems like the banks really like what you're doing. That message resonates with them pretty cleanly.
But not just the banks, payments, insurance, retail, FIs. And I think, like you said, the FSI is a great venue to interact with them and engage with the community. And I think that we did the last one here in the U.S. We're doing the next one in Europe and the U.S. I mean, we've got a few of them lined up, and I think that they're a great opportunity to interact with FIs who are bought into the true passwordless story, and FIs who are looking at it but maybe not ready to do it yet. Maybe they have some other initiatives, or they want to see how their competitors or colleagues play out. And I think it's a good time to bring everyone together and say, look, whether you're doing it now or later, let's all nod our heads and say this is going to happen. So I really like the events.
Let me ask a foundational question, and you can answer this however you see fit. But you know how in security we come up with new approaches and hackers figure it out, and new approach, hackers figure it out. Is this the kind of thing where when people do it, we're going to have to worry about like the black hats and adversaries kind of figuring out the decentralized puzzle, and then we'll just have a new problem? Or do you think foundationally this is something that's going to stick for a while? Does that make sense? I don't know if I worded that question properly.
We never tell customers that, hey, decentralizing credentials is the end-all be-all.
Yeah, eliminate the risk.
You should never say that.
Yeah.
What our customers believe is the paradigm shift, and this is the paradigm shift that no one's talking about, is there's definitely a shift from centralizing passwords to decentralizing credentials on the device.
Right.
Now, as we move credentials to the device, we're going to see many more attacks on the device side. We're going to see hackers take an interest to device side malware and focusing on specific targets to try to break user accounts. We saw a couple years ago at Black Hat an exploit on a HTC device that showed that you could remotely attack the fingerprint sensor and send funds remotely. That's an example of the types of attacks we're going to see. We're going to see people divert their focus from the centralized repository to the individual's device. But that's the key thing. That's what customers really hone in on. Yes, they will attack individual users, but attacking an individual user and having to force the hacker to go one device at a time is simply not scalable. They don't like doing that. They want to attack a single repository with a big payoff with millions of credit cards or passwords in it. Now you're telling them you got to attack each user one by one and focus on decentralized credentials. That's a much harder attack.
I think it is harder. I'm a big, as you know, I'm a big proponent of this. What you and I would do as hackers is we'd focus on orchestrating, like find a way to use automation to go after a bunch of devices.
I love automating.
But it is a way harder proposition. So like in a sense, the decentralization, tell me if I'm saying this right, the decentralization just flat out makes the attacks harder. Is that right? I mean,
exponentially harder.
Doesn't make them impossible. It just makes it way harder, which maybe that's what computer security is.
Nothing makes anything impossible, right?
Yeah,
making it harder is a good step in the right direction, but also containing the attack. Remember, with a centralized repository, when it gets breached, millions of people are impacted. Your public image is impacted. Your users go away. You halt business. It's millions of dollars down the drain. An attack on an individual user is contained. You can remedy it. You can roll back the clock in some cases, and it's not a big PR nightmare. So I think that companies are, like you said, happy knowing that, look, this is exponentially more difficult. This is hard enough, and this is the approach we want to take because it solves for most of the headaches we have. IAM is, according to, I think SANS did a paper on this, it's the #1 CISO expense to this day.
That's been my experience as well. And SANS usually gets those right.
They usually get them right.
They know what they're doing.
Right. So
that sounds right. Probably by a lot.
I would like to see it be one of the least. One of the lowest expenses.
Or at least come down.
Yeah, heavily come down. Because the fact that they were investing millions of dollars in securing these centralized credential stores, and then they're getting breached anyway. Something's got to change.
We interview a lot of cool tech company founders.
I know you do. That's why I wanted to come.
I always make sure we ask a sort of a broad threat type question, and kind of like you've been in this for a while. You tend to be more optimistic or pessimistic, like about cybersecurity in the context of society and government and politics and so on. Like when you're watching TV and you see them talking about cybersecurity all the time, you think we're Are things headed towards a cliff here, or you think we maybe are going to be okay?
You have to be optimistic.
Yeah.
I think on the vendor side, on the providers, you have to be optimistic because you have to offset the pessimism from the media, from the customer side. This is a pessimistic industry. In fact, I really like what you just brought up because when you walk RSA conference or Black Hat, and you look at a lot of the taglines and a lot of the messaging, it's very negative in some cases. You know,
stop, insert real bad thing.
Fear mongering. The bad guys are going to get you, and stay ahead of the bad guys. And a lot of it is just, look, you're selling on fear. So I think one of the things that some of the great companies in this space do, and I'd like us to, personify that, is take a more positive spin. Enablement, right? Empowerment. Make it a positive thing. Our tagline is trust anyone. We believe that when you decentralize authentication, you can bring back trust to your environment. Everybody's talking about, don't trust your users and I can't trust my employees or anything. Well, if you do things the right way, you should be able to bring back a level of trust that's disappeared for some time now. And we think that, look, even if people push back on that optimism, that's good. At least we can have the conversation. But we need the optimism. Otherwise, why are we doing it, right?
That's a great answer. Hey, last question. There's some young people watching right now, and they say, man, George running this cool tech company, that looks like an awesome career.
I'm young people.
I mean, even younger than you. What do you tell them? What kind of advice do you have? Do you tell them, hey, drop everything and do it now, or, study your math, or become a good developer, or get some good partners, or what's your advice?
I've been in startups for a long time, probably as long as I can remember. Since high school, I've been involved in the startup community one way or another. And I've had, a couple of friends who have, come to me and said, one most recently comes over to my place a while back and says, George, you really, you helped me out, and I started a company, and I'm doing it, man. I took what you said, and I did it. I quit my job, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Stop it right now. Go back to work. Don't tell your father I said any of this. So it's nice to hear that people are taking a chance and getting involved in tech and starting businesses. It's awesome, but you always want to caution them to say, at least what you're doing, make sure you have the timing right. That's very hard to get it right. Timing's they say you got the 3 T's. You got team, technology, traction, and I think timing's that 4th T that people don't like to talk about. I say you got to get the timing right, because you can put together a team, you can build the technology, you can get the traction if you have the right people. You can arguably buy all 3 of those things if you have enough money. You can't buy timing.
So Google, Facebook, Twitter, all timed.
All those big plays we've seen are results of impeccable timing. You can't foresee time. There's companies who tried PKI authentication and decentralized credentials years ago. It didn't work, or it wasn't the right timing. We weren't all walking around with devices capable of this technology. So I think we are in a good position with the timing. And I think, for new founders out there who want to do something, just ask yourself, how's my timing? Because if I'm not early, I'm late. And if I'm too early, then it's not the right time.
Many years ago, I was doing something like this, and invited Biz Stone to come. Oh,
wow!
And talk.
Biz here, that's cool.
And he's telling me about Twitter.
Yeah.
And I'm going, he said something like, if you're going out getting a bagel, you tell people. Yeah. And after we chat a little bit, he walked away, and one of the partners I was doing this with, I said, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard in my entire life. We both cracked up laughing, thinking, but he had it just right.
Well, it's still
just
dumb.
As people were as people were becoming addicted to mobility and social, he gave them a way to feed that addiction. He was right on it. If he had come out with that 5 years earlier or later, probably wouldn't have worked. He hit it. I think timing is right.
Remember the tablet?
Yeah.
The tablet, well,
Microsoft had it much earlier.
They tried it. The ecosystem wasn't there. The bandwidth wasn't there.
Content wasn't
there. The content wasn't there, right. And, people, you ask some of these youngins today, they say, who invented the tablet? They'll tell you it was Steve Jobs.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Well, listen, we root for you. I hope things work out as they have so far. Keep going, keep growing. You guys getting bigger?
We're definitely expanding. I like that we're in New York. We just opened a team in London, so I'm really excited about that. We've got a team up in Canada too. I think that it's a really exciting time. The timing is right, and we're rooting for you too, man. I love Tag. I love what you're doing here. I've been following your career for a while now, so awesome, I'm really excited to see Tag is keeping it in New York. Please don't move.
We're not moving, but maybe someday we'll be a big multinational like you guys.
And video.
Hey man, thanks so much for coming by.
You too. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ed.